Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited to continue our series here of trade guides leading up to the 2025 NBA trade deadline. This video specifically centers around the Chicago Bulls, and I am so excited for this one, specifically for one specific trade I'm going to talk about later in this video. If you guys do enjoy the content, first of all, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more. Let's not waste any time today. Let's jump right into that video preview here. What are we going to discuss regarding the Chicago Bulls in this one? First of all, I think the most important place to start for all of these situations is with the Bulls' current collection of tradable players and their contract situations. So who do the Bulls have on their books? Who would they likely look to trade? Just a little bit of a disclaimer, I did exclude both Coby White and Josh Giddey from this, specifically with the idea that the Bulls, given what they just traded to get Josh Giddey and how Coby White has played for them over the last 18 months or so, the Bulls are looking to keep probably both of those guys moving forward. We're also going to discuss the Bulls draft pick situation. That gives us a really good idea not only of their current state of their team, but also the direction that they could potentially be headed. How valuable is tanking for them? How valuable are their own draft picks going to be? That's a super important topic to discuss as well. Long-term cap space. Do the Bulls possibly have a route to operating with cap space? Do they not? That's a really great question, one we'll discuss in this video. It's pretty convoluted. It's not super clear how they'll get there if they found a way to, but we'll discuss that a little bit later on. We're also going to take a little bit of a look at trade exceptions. The Bulls do have a pretty sizable trade exception that is very notable and worth discussing, stemming from the DeMar DeRozan trade, sign and trade specifically to the Sacramento Kings this past offseason. We'll then look at potential trades the Bulls can make this trade deadline, again with one very specific trade I'm super excited to get to. I almost want to jump to that part of the video right now. Just hold on, we'll get there, okay? Make sure you guys stay for everything in between. And then we'll also talk about the projected activity level. How active do I think the Bulls will be? And kind of what role will they play in the marketplace this trade deadline? Starting with those tradable players, first of all, Zach LaVine. I think he is the main headliner here. Has had a pretty good season for himself, shooting the ball pretty well. And I think obviously the scoring has been extremely evident. This is one issue I have with the NBA specifically and how we cover the NBA, and myself included at times. The contracts and the CBA and the cap tables, all of that is so important that at times we overlook how good or how talented players are because of the contract number associated with that player. I think Zach LaVine's a real great example of this. He's extremely talented. He's one of the better scorers in the entire NBA with his ability to score on all three levels. He shoots the ball at a really, really good clip consistently despite taking very high degree of difficulty shots. Zach LaVine's an awesome player. The issue is he makes a ton of money, over $40 million a year, making $43 million specifically this season. He has 2 years after this year as well. That final year is a player option, which he will almost certainly opt into. I would be shocked if he did not. So a team trading for Zach LaVine, you're really looking at 2 additional years after this season of control on his contract, which again comes at a very high price point. Lonzo Ball is an expiring contract. I'm happy to have seen him healthy playing some NBA games this year. Obviously, he's been shaken up again here and there with the wrist and such, but it's been great getting to see Lonzo Ball play basketball again, and I hope that his career continues moving past this season. I just hope he stays healthy. That's the biggest thing that I want to say about Lonzo Ball, but that big salary, $21 million expiring salary, is going to be an interesting tool to play with out in the market. We'll see if teams are interested in maybe renting Lonzo Ball. I'm sure the Bulls would not be asking for too much for him given the injury concerns. I'm just not sure, especially with Josh Giddey and Coby White, if the Bulls are really banking on Lonzo Ball being a part of their core nucleus moving forward. So it's very possible that the Bulls could look to include Lonzo Ball either as a third team in a trade or just flat out to another team in a 2-team trade construct for something fairly reasonable, not a huge price point in a trade, I'm having to guess at this point in time. Nikola Vucevic has also been playing some of his best basketball in recent history. He's been shooting the ball really well from 3 this season, most specifically. Now, I'm still a little bit gun shy on the Nikola Vucevic stock, specifically because I think he's a very poor rim roller. And what I mean by that is when you use him as an on-ball screen setter, which is what a lot of the playoff basketball comes down to finding advantages for your best player. If you're having Nikola Vucevic set that screen, he's not the quickest downhill roller. He's not much of an above-the-rim lob threat. Now, he does sit in the pocket really well. He does obviously have a ton of touch. You can post him up. There's a lot of things you can use Vucevic for. It's just not rim rolling and not a bunch of screen setting and diving to the rim, even though he's shooting the ball this year really well and can kind of function as a pick and pop threat. I just don't really love the downhill dynamism that he can provide, so I'm still a little gun shy myself. But that contract, I think price point wise is not too crazy. Chicago obviously is a team that they're kind of stuck in mediocrity right now, and looking at the roster, it's pretty easy to tell why. They have talent, but the talent doesn't really fit congruently together. And the players that are making a lot of money, they're not 1A, 1B stars. They're, kind of second, third options. And Vucevic at this point in time, it's not really clear how he would best fit around winning basketball teams in the year 2024 going into 2025. Patrick Williams making $18 million a year for the next 4 years, this year included in that. He's tradable. I don't think the Bulls will trade him, though, ultimately. Jalen Smith, I think, is a player that a ton of teams would have interest in, especially in the Western Conference right now, where size is just so important. The age-old question, does size matter? I mean, ask her, first of all, but yes, I'm sure it does. And in the NBA specifically, it really does matter. So Jalen Smith is a player who could really help a bunch of teams. He's on a very friendly contract, I would say, making less than the mid-level exception right now. So definitely a tradable contract and one that a lot of teams will have interest in. I would assume new. 2 years left on his contract. Obviously, a real Illinois product, played for the Fighting Illini. Has been a pretty solid player for the Bulls early in his career as a former second-round pick. I don't really expect him to get traded, but he's another one that I'm sure some teams would have some significant interest in if he became available. And Javon Carter, on a 1+1, he's making a little bit over $6 million annually. So that's a player that is definitely movable as well. We'll also talk about him in a potential trade later on. The Bulls, here is their draft pick situation. This is one of the most important parts of the video. They own Portland's 2025 first, but it has lottery protections for multiple years. It's kind of a fake pick in a lot of ways. I'm not sure if the Bulls are ever really going to gain anything from this asset in terms of first-round draft pick compensation, but they also do owe their own 2025 first. They owe that to San Antonio, but this is why this is one of the most important things. Tanking for Chicago is a very good idea. Their pick is top 10 protected this year. It is then top 8 protected in 2026 and 2027. If it doesn't convey by 2027, the pick becomes a second-round draft pick going to San Antonio. The worst thing Chicago can do is somehow have the 11th pick in this draft, or somehow have the 9th pick in 2026 or 2027 and convey that pick. If the Bulls are not going to be a real playoff team, sending a lottery pick out the door to San Antonio specifically, who has Victor Wembanyama already, is terrible, especially since this pick was given up for DeMar DeRozan, who's not even playing for your team anymore. You cannot afford to have this pick convey. So the Bulls need to do a little bit of tampering, a little bit of tinkering, and a little bit of tanking to find their way down to the bottom in order to not give up this draft pick in the first round. They just cannot afford to do it, especially with where their current roster is. They need every first round draft asset they can possibly get. This is super important for them. They need to find ways to stay bad just enough to keep these picks, because they cannot afford to send, like I said, the 11th pick this year or the 9th pick next year out the door to San Antonio as a result of the DeMar DeRozan trade from a few years back. Moving on now to the long-term cap space question. I said we were going to answer that in this video. Here we are. Right now, they are projected to be well negative in functional cap space this offseason. Now, this number can change quite a bit depending on what happens at the trade deadline. Theoretically, if they were to trade Nikola Vucevic and Zach LaVine for expiring contracts, they could find their way to roughly $48 million in practical cap space. So if they were able to salary dump Vucevic and LaVine for expiring contracts, they could be a max cap space team in the offseason. The issue with that, it's just not really realistic, right? You're going to, if you're trading Vucevic, and especially if you're trading LaVine, who has such a big, enormous contract, it's almost impossible for them to realistically walk away with cap space as a result. One of the few places that this could maybe work is if they traded LaVine to Brooklyn, centered around Ben Simmons, and Simmons' expiring contract. But the question is, why would Brooklyn do that, right? Unless Brooklyn believes LaVine could be a huge piece for them moving forward, which I just don't think they would believe. There's really not a realistic way that they get to cap space. Now, it's possible, right? That's the entire point of what I'm telling you here. But it's not really realistic, especially since Josh Giddey has a projected cap hold of over $25 million. The Bulls are going to be a semi-expensive team despite not being very good. That's just kind of the reality. So keep that in mind as we go throughout this. It's just not very realistic that they're going to be able to operate with cap space moving into the 2025 offseason. When it comes to trade exceptions, they do have some meaningful trade exceptions here. First of all, I need to note this. For the entire duration of this season, the Bulls are hard capped at the first apron. They are about $9.5 million away from that hard cap number. So that means, what I'm saying right now, they could take in technically $9.5 million right now, get right up to that first apron hard cap, and stay there. And they could do so by breaking up that bottom trade exception, the one that is $17.5 million. That is from the sign and trade of DeMar DeRozan to Sacramento this past offseason. That doesn't expire, though, until July 8th of 2025. So Chicago might be best suited to sit and wait on that trade exception, use it in the offseason when they're no longer hard capped, and they could use the entirety of it instead of just $9.5 million. That's, first of all, the first option that they could theoretically go with. They also have one that expires around the date of the NBA draft in 2025, which is a little bit less than $3 million. That's a very usable trade exception. That's something I think that they should look to probably use at the trade deadline this year. If there's some team trying to trade a player who's making the minimum, or if there's some team that needs to move some money around in some way or another, some teams might try and duck below the luxury tax, some teams might try to duck below the first apron, some teams might try to duck below the second apron. $3 million isn't a lot, but for some teams it might be right around the hover point of where they want to get below a certain number line for one reason or another. The Bulls could be a great team to help them out with that because they have room between them and their first apron hard cap right now. They have that $2.873 million trade exception to take in a salary, whether it be a late first round pick, former late first round pick, or just flat out a player who's making the minimum somewhere, right, with like 7 years of experience or something. If the Bulls can help someone out, they should do that. They could probably get a future second round pick just for being a helpful team to another organization. So I think for Arturas Karnisovas specifically, using that exception this trade deadline makes a ton of sense. I would personally wait on that $17.5 million trade exception unless you're able to move Vucevic or LaVine or something and your finances change pretty drastically. Otherwise, I think that $17.5 million trade exception, saving it through the draft and into early stages of free agency this upcoming late June and early July, could be very beneficial for Chicago moving forward. Then we go on here to a few teams to trade with. And there's one more team I want to talk about that's not pictured on the graphic presently. But let's start with the Golden State Warriors. They have DeAnthony Melton's contract to trade. They also have a collection of other contracts. Kevon Looney making $8 million. They have Kyle Anderson's contract. They've got a bunch of middle-sized contracts, and that's been one of the strengths of the Warriors this season. They are a very deep team. They have a good collection of overall talent. But I think if they're looking to make an upgrade, one thing that the Warriors haven't had really since Andrew Bogut is a big man with touch. They haven't really had that as much as of late. Now, Vucevic isn't a perfect fit in Golden State, but I think with their post-split series, giving them a post-up scoring option like Vucevic could create a little bit more of a dynamic offensive half-court setting at times when both Draymond Green or Steph Curry do not have the basketball. That's the one benefit I could see Vucevic really bringing to Golden State. Now, I really like Trace Jackson-Davis. I think leaning into him more would be just as beneficial in a lot of ways as a post-up passer anyway. But I think Vucevic, if there's a destination for him, I do think Golden State has not only the contracts to make it work, but also the half-court offensive ideology and setting and floor spacing around a Nikola Vucevic to maybe find ways to win. And I also think if you're trying to deal with Minnesota, you're trying to deal with Denver, you're trying to deal with Dallas in the Western Conference, adding in a real 6'10", 6'11" big body who's strong, physical, and has played playoff basketball before would not be a bad idea either. The Denver Nuggets could be a real landing spot for Jalen Smith, specifically with the contract of Zeke Naji. They could dump Naji. They could dump, maybe a first-round pick swap in there. Something Chicago could maybe look at as long-term insurance, right? As the Bulls start to hopefully become better in the next 4 to 6 years, maybe the Nuggets, as Nikola Jokic ages and kind of the brain drain we've seen in terms of talent from Denver, maybe a pick swap in 2030 wouldn't be super bad for Chicago to acquire in some type of deal if you trade Jalen Smith for Zeke Nnaji and you try and get a first round swap out of it. That could be like a real long-term high upside move for Chicago to give up Jalen Smith for. The Lakers, I could see as a destination for either Zach LaVine or Nikola Vucevic. Now, the LaVine one's obviously extremely complicated and very not likely, to be honest with you. It would probably have to center around D'Angelo Russell. Gabe Vincent would maybe have to be included. It's very difficult to see the Lakers making a trade like that, given the fact that Rob Pelinka did something similar a few years ago when he traded Kyle Kuzma and a collection of other pieces, including Kentavious Caldwell-Pope to Washington for Russell Westbrook. That just aged horribly. And given the new CBA and the ramifications of massive spending on 3 players, I'm just not sure the Lakers can really feasibly do that. It's possible, but I'm not sure that they actually will do that, is more so what I'm trying to say here. On the Nikola Vucevic, again, I've talked about it in a lot of my videos. The Lakers are looking for a big man. Vucevic is talented. He makes about $20 million, a little bit over that. That's where the D'Angelo Russell contract plus, Jackson Hayes or plus Christian Wood, something like that could get you to Vucevic's money. And it would be a pretty significant upgrade into the front court for the Lakers, but it would sacrifice some of their backcourt depth. And I think for Los Angeles right now, you can tell that their rotation's about 1 or 2 players short as it is. So if you're improving your front court depth at the cost of your backcourt depth, I'm not sure how far the needle is moved forward for you in that point of view. The Charlotte Hornets could be another Jalen Smith team. I think specifically every time I watch Charlotte play, I really think LaMelo Ball is one of the more underrated players in the league. I think from a talent perspective, he just hasn't had the right supporting cast around him. And specifically, I'm tired of watching Taj Gibson be a role man for them. I'm tired of watching LaMelo Ball try and utilize these sub-average, mediocre big men, and I'm kind of being nice calling them mediocre. Honestly, Charlotte has an infrastructure of terrible big men around LaMelo Ball. Nick Richards is not good. I think he's an extremely overrated player. I think, obviously Mark Williams, I do believe in Mark Williams. He's just been injured all the time. Taj Gibson is ancient at this point in time. The Hornets need a big man who can do stuff. And by do stuff, I mean shoot a little bit, finish at the rim. Those are things Jalen Smith is just far better at than what they currently have on their roster. Now, I know people will say, well, Nick Richards finishes at the rim. He has 0 help defense IQ. Nick Richards, leaves his feet on the dumbest things. Nick Richards cannot play defense in the NBA at an acceptable level to be a center, honestly. And then the Clippers, I think, are another team that can make sense for guard landing spots. Now, Javon Carter hasn't really played a lot and hasn't played very well when he's played, but he could be an option for the Clippers. Really, we're talking about an upgrade over Kevin Porter Jr., so the bar is set super low here for that. Kevin Porter Jr. is one of the worst high-usage players in the entire NBA, probably the worst high-usage player in the entire NBA right now. So I would assume New could make sense. Javon Carter, anyone who could dribble, pass, or shoot, any of those 3 things would be an upgrade, honestly, at this point in time for the Clippers and their backup guard spot. So Desumnu specifically would be a significant upgrade. Javon Carter, even though he hasn't played well, I think the one thing the Clippers are really priding themselves on this year is defense. And Javon Carter, even going back to his high school tape, going back to his time at West Virginia, he's been all about defense. His whole entire basketball career is defense first. So if the Clippers are looking to kind of build on one of their strengths, Javon Carter could make some sense in that. But now this is the real deal I wanted to talk about, and it regards Bradley Beal, the big one. This is a big trade. This is one that, first of all, if I had to guess, it will not happen. But this is the only trade on the face of the earth that makes any form of sense for Bradley Beal right now, because Bradley Beal has a no-trade clause. The Phoenix Suns will be basically incapable of trading him. There is one situation, there is one team in the NBA that makes even remote sense for Bradley Beal to really consider waiving his no-trade clause for, that would also want him. And that team is the Chicago Bulls. The benefit here for the Bulls, you get Bradley Beal, you reunite him with his former college coach Billy Donovan. That's the reason he waives his no-trade clause. He's able to put up numbers. Right now he's averaging 17 points a game for the Chicago Bulls. You put him back into, or for the Phoenix Suns, you put him into Chicago. He's probably averaging 22 to 24, 25 points per night, making his stats look better. He's helping the back of his basketball card. That's about it. He's not really contributing to a ton of winning basketball in Phoenix. He wouldn't be doing so in Chicago, but he's now in a situation where he's probably a little bit happier and scoring the basketball more frequently. The Bulls, in order to take Beal's no trade clause and huge, ginormous $50 million a year contract, get a 2031 first round unprotected pick swap from the Phoenix Suns. That is a crown jewel asset. The Suns are not very good right now. Kevin Durant is arguably their best player at 36 years old. This team is extremely old. They don't win a lot of games. They don't have control of their own draft picks. They don't have a ton of build-around young players outside of Devin Booker, who might not even want to be in Phoenix in 3-4 years. This is an asset that could really revolutionize future Chicago Bulls basketball. Now listen, it's not going to show up for 6-7 years. That's okay. It's a very valuable pick to have. It's one you want to have control of. And yes, you do have to eat Bradley Beal's contract to get it. It's a great thing to do, though, if you're Chicago, a team that's really looking for long-term direction. Why would the Phoenix Suns do this? Well, one, you get off of Bradley Beal's contract. You break his contract up into two players. Remember, the Suns, since they're a second apron team, cannot aggregate salaries together themselves. So breaking up that contract into two players does make some sense. It opens up extra trade flexibility because you now have Javon Carter's $6.5 million contract you could go out into the marketplace with, try and make a different trade, maybe try and adjust your roster a little bit more. From that point of view, you're also getting off of the no trade clause completely, so you no longer have Beal's no trade clause, but you have LaVine's contract, which is a little bit more tradable. Not tradable, as Bulls fans know, but a little bit more tradable, especially as we get further into the contract when it's an expiring or only 2 years left on it. It's way more movable than Beal's contract is. Yes, it does cost you a 2031 pick swap to do that, but LaVine's a way better player than Bradley Beal at this point in time. He's a better three-point shooter than Bradley Beal. I think he's a cleaner fit next to Devin Booker. He's a better transition option than Bradley Beal. Zach LaVine's just flat out better than Bradley Beal, and he would help the Phoenix Suns right now. He would help their trade flexibility a ton. Javon Carter helps their trade flexibility a little bit. And first of all, Javon Carter also started his real NBA career basically with the Milwaukee Bucks under Mike Budenholzer. I think this trade makes a lot of sense, honestly. Now you could argue, does Phoenix have to give up a couple more second round picks because of how bad Beal's contract is? Maybe, but I do think if Beal's going to waive his no trade clause, reuniting with Billy Donovan's one of the only options in the entire NBA that he would do that for. And I think the Suns, a team that is they're extremely desperate, and they have completely went by the wayside in terms of their future draft pick capital. Matt Ishbia has done a horrendous job, to the point where this is the only way out. This is their get out of jail almost free card. It's not free because it's costing you a future pick, but this is probably the best that they can do. And if you get off of Beal, you bring in LaVine, you get extra flexibility with Javon Carter's contract, which is not even expiring, so you have him next year to trade as well if they want to. This is the best case scenario for Phoenix in my estimation. For them at the deadline, this would be the best thing they can do. And for Chicago, it gives you maybe a blue chip draft pick down the road. And that is something that could completely revolutionize this franchise. It won't impact the franchise for a long time, but in the 2031 draft, you never know. You never know. It could be a top 5 pick. It could be the number 1 pick. And that's really the benefit that you would be that's the risk you're taking, or that's the swing you're taking if you're the Chicago Bulls. Activity level. Now, this is what I think is super important here. This is one of the most important things we're going to talk about. This is a time period for the Bulls to be opportunistic sellers. Their two best players, in some ways, in both Zach LaVine and Nikola Vucevic, in terms of how much they're paid, this, and the other thing. This is a time for them to be opportunistic sellers. LaVine's playing relatively well. Vucevic is playing relatively well. If there's going to be any market value for them at all, it's going to be right now. If you can trade Zach LaVine to Phoenix, you should. If you can trade Nikola Vucevic somewhere, you should. Whatever draft picks, whatever you get out of it, it's going to be beneficial because you're opening up opportunities. It's not just about the salaries. It's not just about what draft picks you get back. It's about getting out of this current iteration of Bulls basketball and trying to pivot to the next generation of Chicago Bulls basketball. If you can get assets, great. If you can get out of contracts, great. Whatever you have to do to kind of change the tide of this organization, because right now they're stuck in the worst place in NBA basketball. You're stuck being terribly mediocre. You're not good enough to really do anything in the playoffs. Even if you make it, you're probably not even going to make it. You're just going to be a playing team at best. You might end up getting rid of your own first round picks as a result because of the DeMar DeRozan deal that we've talked about with San Antonio. They need to be bad. They need to be bad, and they need to try and trade Zach LaVine. They need to try and trade Nikola Vucevic. I know they've been trying. I know that they're going to look into it. I don't care if you're taking pennies on the dollar. You need to do something. You need to change this team. The team is not good. The team will not be good. The team will never be good with Zach LaVine and Nikola Vucevic as two of your 3 or 4 best players. It's just not going to be that good. Okay, the Bulls need to revolutionize the team. I want to see Matas Buzelis in a role where he's handling the basketball more. I want to see this team looking way different. Okay, flip around the team, change it up. Let Kobe White, let Josh Giddey, let Matas Buzelis be the core nucleus of the team for now. See what you have. Take some time, garner draft picks around the top of the draft, add young talent, change the format of this Chicago Bulls roster. I really hope you guys did enjoy. If you did, leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content. Really appreciate you guys so much, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.